On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And before we hop into our interview today with John McDonough, I just wanted to quickly play an advertisement from our sponsor.
Are you a life science investor or executive looking to make meaningful connections? Introducing Bullpen, an exclusive club where industry leaders gather to help others succeed. Our mantra is simple: find someone to help. Repeat. Join us for virtual panels, networking events, and unparalleled opportunities to collaborate with top-tier professionals. Bullpen, where deal makers meet and innovation thrives. Apply now at bullpen.ventures.
In this episode of Life Science Success, I'm interviewing John McDonough, the Executive Chairman and CEO of Sunbird Bio. With over 30 years of experience in the life sciences industry, John leads innovative efforts in developing blood-based diagnostics for neurological disorders. So welcome, John. It's great to have you on.
Great to be here, Don. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And before we sort of really dive into things, I guess, could you tell listeners a little bit about yourself and what led you to Sunbird Bio?
Yeah, you bet. I've been involved in early stage companies, actually going back over 40 years, and initially spent 10 to 15 years in high technology venture startups, taking a couple of companies public. And got to a point in the mid 90s where I really wanted to be involved in more directly in technologies and products that hopefully could make a difference in people's lives, made a shift into the life science industry, and have really had the great fortune to work with a lot of great people in early stage startups where we've taken products to market that I really believe have made a difference. And I think what we're doing at Sunbird is the biggest opportunity that I've been involved with for sure.
Yeah, that transition must have been an interesting one as well. I mean, I guess as you sort of looked at the opportunity, did you also sort of question, is this the right move, or did you just know, from the get-go that that's the direction you wanted to go?
Yeah, I really knew I didn't have any second thoughts on that one, and the work that I had done in high technology, and a lot of people have asked me this, it really translated over real well from a business standpoint. Certainly you needed to learn about FDA and regulations and reimbursement, but in many respects, bits and bytes transfer over into cells and biology in a pretty straightforward way. And so I was off and running pretty quickly.
Yeah, the other thing that I would imagine was just the overall length of time. I mean, it seems to me like the advantage of being on the technology side is that you also don't have the delays that for approvals and things like that through the FDA, right? And so, I would imagine that learning could be both beneficial but also frustrating at times.
It is. It's a two-edged sword. It certainly takes longer to see your venture through to fruition, but on the positive side, once you get there, the barriers for others to get there are pretty significant. We're in high technology. Yeah, and every 6 months, you look at what's going on in artificial intelligence. You could definitely be a here today, gone tomorrow type of thing.
Yeah, it's funny because I constantly telling my drug development friends that I feel like diagnostics is the place to be because our window still for approval is typically shorter than theirs on the drug side. So, I oftentimes, sort of have these debates with people where, when they're on the drug side and drug development, they just don't want to leave. And I'm like, hey, yeah, but the water is a little warmer on the opposite side of this, on the diagnostic side.
It is. It is definitely easier and less risky. And the amount of capital to get a product to market, you're 5 to 10%, probably, maybe even less than that, of what it would take for a drug to get in there. I believe the statistics are that about 15% of healthcare dollars are spent on diagnostics, but you need all of that to drive the 85%, which drives the therapeutic decisions, of course.
Yeah, for sure. So with all of your experience, with over 30 years of experience in the field, what have been some of your more significant changes that you've witnessed in life sciences?
There's been a lot, for sure. You could look at the world of regulation, and that has changed pretty significantly, although it changes and then it goes back to what it was, and then it changes and then it goes back to what it was. So you start to recognize certain cycles that are repeating themselves, and it becomes much more predictable and more understandable. But more importantly, the biggest breakthroughs in my mind have been to date really in cancer diagnostics, cancer therapeutics. We have a long way to go. We all know that. Cancer has touched probably just about all of our lives in some way. And but the breakthrough that is there have been really significant. I was involved with one company that had a cervical cancer diagnostic that really changed the game and really led to a reduction in cervical cancer deaths by 70%. So I think that's one big area. And then at a more broad level, and some of this has certainly been driven by technology and the internet, but some of it by the state of healthcare, people are taking more responsibility for their decisions. And you really need to factor that in to whatever therapeutics, diagnostics, or devices that you're working on. It's a big breakthrough. It's a significant, very significant change. People can learn about a problem, and you can get in trouble. You can diagnose yourself and treat yourself and all that sort of stuff. But people taking much more control of their healthcare. And importantly, in terms of just staying well and staying healthy and tracking devices and all those sorts of things, people know more and are much more taking control of their medical decisions.
Yeah, for sure. And it will be interesting to watch, how that continues to evolve. I was on a call yesterday where somebody was talking about miniaturizing MRI, is one example, and just talking about the overall impact that this could have in a lot of different places in the world. And yes, having a personal device that tells you more about, how you're personally performing, but also just watching this overall evolution of medical devices, is an amazing thing to watch as well.
Yeah, it sure is. And we know there's a whole lot more to come. And now, of course, all these devices are being integrated together to give you a more full picture of your state of health.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me a little bit more about Sunbird Bio. What is your vision for the company, and what drew you to Sunbird Bio in the first place?
Well, there'll be certainly a common theme in everything that I've done. There's two things that drove me to Sunbird Bio. One are the people who've been involved. Fortunate to have worked with some of the lead investors that are, in my opinion, among the best in the world. Great people, very aligned, trying to make a difference in healthcare. And secondly, is just the enormous opportunity. What we're focused on are developing blood tests for detecting various types of neurological disease, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ALS, and the like. And there's a huge unmet need. In fact, I would make a very strong case that in the world of neurological disease, we are where cancer was perhaps 25 years ago. We have a whole lot more to learn. The therapeutics, in a very exciting way, are just starting to hit the market. Led by Eli Lilly and Eisai with their drugs focused on Alzheimer's disease. There's in the order of 160 plus clinical trials for different therapeutics taking place as we speak. And yet at the same time, the ability to diagnose this disease is very, very difficult, mostly dependent on cognitive tests, which are problematic, and especially when you're with primary care physicians who are just don't get much training on that and are the gatekeeper of referring patients to neurologists. And when you get to the neurologist, they are typically relying on deeper cognitive tests and perhaps PET scans, which are expensive, $8,000 a scan, and not accessible around the world, in fact, many parts of the country. And there's really a huge unmet need to detect these diseases through a simple, far less invasive and costly blood test. And that's where our focus is. And I think we can make a big difference.
So in terms of the test itself, I wanted to ask you, some of these questions as well. Does the test provide any sort of early indicators, or is it something where you're presenting already with some form of cognitive issue, and all of a sudden they're trying to diagnose, like, what is this? Is it really Alzheimer's, or is it something else?
It's a great question, Don, because where the industry is now is where diagnosing and treating patients who have some kind of cognitive symptoms. And we have tests that can detect those diseases at those very early stages. But where this is going, and we're in discussions, and where the pharmaceutical industry wants to take it, it will take it, and the studies that we'll be involved in the future are focusing on patients with no symptoms, the asymptomatic patient population, where you could detect early, very early signs of these proteins that basically aggregate in the brain. A lot of people refer to it as plaque, but it's certain types of proteins that exist in healthy and unhealthy patients. The difference in an unhealthy patient is these proteins become sticky and they clump and they aggregate. And what we want to be able to do is to detect patients and treat them before they're symptomatic and avoid this disease. and we're going to get there. I'd love to tell you we'll be there in a year. Probably not. 5 years, maybe 10 years. Will it take longer than that? Quite possibly take longer than that. But the studies are just getting underway to go after that patient population. And I think we're going to get to the point in the future when you get perhaps to a certain age, randomly pick, age 50, age 55, you'll be tested to see if you're starting to have effects of disease proteins in your brain. You'll get treated and you'll avoid the disease. And that's where we want to be. Predict and prevent is a whole lot better than diagnose and treat.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I can only imagine what I've heard about Alzheimer's disease as well is that even if you're taking anything that is available today, it may slow some of the things from happening to you, but it won't, fully reverse, the impact of this disease either. So it would be nice to be able to diagnose it earlier, and then also, who knows what happens then with the treatment path, right? then it might
exactly
have more advantage long term.
What's really interesting, what you said is correct. The early treatments slow the rate of decline, which is a big step in the right direction. But of course, that's different than a cure or even freezing the state of the disease. However, the studies that have been run to date are based on diagnostics that simply detect the proteins that are aggregating associated with Alzheimer's disease. The rate of understanding of disease, the rate of understanding of the brain itself is growing at just an absolutely accelerated rate. It's only been recent that we now understand that as many as 50% of patients with Alzheimer's disease also have the proteins which are referred to as alpha-synuclein that aggregate in their brain, but alpha-synuclein is associated with Parkinson's disease. And the proteins that are associated with ALS, about 25% of patients have that phenomenon going on at the same time. So the real question would be, and this is where Sunbird, I believe, can make a big difference. To our knowledge, we have the only approach that can detect all of it. We have tests in development, some which are moving into being available for research purposes, that can detect the proteins associated with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. If you could run a study and really understand which patients had these comorbidities, you may find out, when we talk about a decline, you improve the rate of decline, that's of course across the whole population. if you could segment that patient population, you may find different efficacy rates for different patients of different types. And that is something that I think we know we can do, and we're hopeful could provide a breakthrough for therapeutic targeting as well.
Excellent. So can you tell me a little bit more about how does the test work?
Yeah, so the proteins that clump in the brain exist in a healthy brain, and they will, in small quantities, pass through the blood-brain barrier. The difference between a healthy and an unhealthy protein, kind of crudely speaking, the unhealthy protein becomes sticky, and that's what subjects it to being able to aggregate in the brain. Blood diagnostic tests, and there are a few of them that are available in the market today specifically for Alzheimer's disease, they cannot differentiate the difference between a healthy protein and an unhealthy protein. So they either are using a ratio approach of looking at how many of these proteins are in the bloodstream versus another protein, and then making a call if the ratio changes, or they need to discover a completely novel biomarker that's a reflection of the disease. And there's all sorts of issues associated with that, not the least of which is you need a new biomarker discovery for every disease. That's the state of where we're at. What the team at Sunbird did under the leadership of Wei-Lin Shao, who's our scientific founder and chief scientific officer, they discovered that sticky proteins, specifically in the brain, bind or adhere to extracellular vesicles that pass through the blood-brain barrier. And what we've developed is a detection method that can detect both the presence of those extracellular vesicles and the proteins that they are carrying through the blood-brain barrier. The other advantage of the approach that we have is that there's 3 to 4 orders of magnitude more of these vesicles than the proteins themselves that pass through the blood-brain barrier. So we detect specifically the vesicle and the protein. And when we do, we know we're detecting very specifically a diseased protein. And to our knowledge, nobody else has that approach or can do that. And we've run multiple studies, kind of a leading study that was published in Nature Communication, where we compared for our Alzheimer's disease test the Sunbird approach to a PET scan, which is very good at doing this, but has the cost and other issues associated earlier. And we showed an over 90% correlation of our blood tests to a PET scan result. We've run multiple other studies for both the proteins associated with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, ALS, and we're seeing the same over 90% correlation to whatever the respective goal standard may be. So we have a direct detection of disease proteins. The advantage of that is we can apply this to any neurological disorder, which is why we have such a deep and rich pipeline of products in development. And just as importantly, I'm 100% sure that if I'm invited back here in a year or 18 months, there's going to be a new discovery and a new protein, and we're going to be developing that too, because we have the approach that will work as this market and the science becomes better understood and evolves. Additionally, we can quantitate the amount of protein, which no other approach can do either, which means we know if the aggregation is low, medium, high. The advantage of that is you can monitor the progression of the disease. And importantly, as therapy is applied to patients, you can monitor the improvement and the reduction of the aggregated state of the proteins.
So my next question just kind of ties, I would say, back to the last question, but also I'm going to carry it a little bit forward. I'll kind of cover the question first, but it's overall, I would love to know much more about your milestones and what you're looking for in terms of exciting partnerships or financing plans on the horizon. But also, I heard you mention RUO in a portion of your discussion just a minute ago. So it sounds to me like you're getting to a point where the test will be available via research use only at certain labs, are you then also running the diagnostic in a centralized lab, or are you running, or are labs running it, somewhere local to the patient?
Yes, today we're running it in a centralized lab. We have a lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So all of those tests are available within that lab and will be available in that lab. Additionally, for research purposes, and we'll have at least two of these tests available, one in early 2025, another in the middle of 2025 in that RUL lab. And then we intend to then move those tests all the way through to CLIA validation, which would enable these tests to be used by neurologists to aid in the diagnosis of disease. We're seeing a tremendous amount of interest with biopharma, of course, not surprisingly. One of our investors that joined our investor syndicate this year is Eli Lilly. So we have a great relationship and partnership with them, and look forward to pursuing multiple clinical opportunities with them in 2025 and beyond.
It's really so critical, I feel like, at this point in time, with when so many companies are struggling, just hearing of the different pathways that a diagnostics development company can go, from research use only to CLIA to hopefully full FDA approval, and having a test out in the market, but also having more personalized diagnostics. If the drug companies are really targeting medicines and people, hopefully it results in better indicator for the drug company as well, in terms of, hey, your drug will definitely have an impact here or not.
Yes, and our vision here is there's multiple sides to this. One, of course, is enabling pharma to target the right patients, monitor the effectiveness of their therapies, get more of these therapies into the market to benefit patients. And then ultimately, when you get into the patient testing, there's really two places where we can help. The first one is a patient is presented at a neurologist. The neurologist needs to diagnose it. At the time they present to the neurologist, they're really presenting with signs of dementia, not signs of Alzheimer's disease, and they need to diagnose, do they have dementia, and if so, which type? Roughly 60% of all dementia is Alzheimer's disease. The other 40% are all the others that I mentioned earlier. So we think we can make a big difference in aiding the neurologist. But back up a step further, where does a patient go for the first time when they have experiencing a problem? Well, they go to their primary care physician. And at the primary care physician, they have very limited training on running these cognitive tests, but yet they are a critical gatekeeper in referring the patient to the neurologist, and doing it early, because if there's anything we know about medicine that we've learned in all areas, detect early, you have a much higher probability of long-term success. Well, it's believed that as many as 50% of patients are lost in that referral process from primary care to the neurologist. By having a full panel, the like of which we're developing, we can cover the vast majority of all dementia. And ultimately, in going through an FDA clearance process, we want to offer a simple blood test for screening symptomatic patients to aid the primary care physician in that referral process, and then ultimately be the key gatekeeper for identifying and testing asymptomatic patients and preventing the disease, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. The other question I have related to the test as well is, what are some of the challenges in developing and bringing to market a blood-based diagnostic test?
Well, it's data is usually at the top of the list. You just can't have enough data. I mentioned a company. I was at a company, Cytech, who changed the world of cervical cancer screening, and we ended up with, at the time I left, we had about a 70% market share, and had just celebrated the 1,000th publication of data. The product had been on the market for about 10 years. and you still have 30% of the world that hadn't been convinced that this product worked, even though it was the data was pretty compelling. So you need data, and for neurological disease, getting access to the patients, the samples, being able to correlate all of those test results to actual disease is one of the key challenges. And then secondly, it's just working your way through the process, you know, the validation process, ultimately the FDA, the regulations, the quality systems, and as you get out there into clinical testing, oh yes, reimbursement, because somehow all of this needs to get paid for in some way. And so now you need to demonstrate and develop the economic return on these tests, which are pretty compelling and you would think straightforward, but you still need to do the studies to show the economic benefits.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me is I'm working with one particular company who, even before they had conducted what I would say are serious laboratory studies on their diagnostic, they the folks in the venture capital firms were already asking questions around, what is the what does reimbursement look like, for this particular diagnostic. And I mean, we had that in the plan. I mean, it's in the overall project plan for the diagnostic, but it was, planned for much later to be able to answer that question. But I think given the market with regards to, venture capital and things like that at this point, it's just led people to just wanting to solidify their investments much earlier as well. And so it leads to having to provide these answers earlier. And yeah, it led us down a whole rabbit hole of having to provide that as well.
Exactly. And it's so early, you don't really know the answer, but you end up with a good hypothesis that hopefully convinces people to move forward.
Right, exactly. So, overall with Sunbird Bio, I feel like I have a good understanding of the organization itself, but you also are the founder of Crush Colon Cancer Foundation. How do you balance your work at Sunbird, with your philanthropic efforts?
Yeah, so you need to do both. In my view, you need to find a way to give back. Colon cancer is something that has touched the life of my families, especially my wife and her family. And it's something that we both started several years ago. There's a lot of other people that are involved in it. We've been really fortunate through the donations of so many people to have raised a lot of money that we funneled through to the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, and specifically to the lab of Dr. Marios Giannakis, who leads all of the colon cancer research. And he's doing some really exciting things in treating patients. So, we get involved typically in one, maybe two events a year, which are major fundraisers. And as they say, there's 24 hours in a day, and there's always enough time for getting involved, whether it's crush colon cancer or somebody else's cause, because we all know there's more of them out there than we can all support. But we're delighted to be able to help Dana-Farber.
Oh, that's good. It's phenomenal. So you've also been involved in raising over $500 million in capital and created over $6 billion in market value. What's your approach to securing funding and driving company growth?
Yeah, well, I live by the philosophy of it's better to be lucky than good. So I've been really fortunate to be a part of some great organizations, quite honestly, with great technologies and products and great people. And I think the key thing, is people. It really is. If you can have great people who are aligned, you can accomplish more than you could possibly imagine. And as we raise capital, we always try to think about not raising capital to fund a period of time, but rather to raise capital to achieve value creating goals. We know when you bring capital in, you need to provide a return on that investment. So if you were looking at Sunbird as an investment, as we bring more and more products to market, the value of the enterprise grows. And so as we raise capital, we want to make sure that we're hitting those real value creating points that can provide an excellent return. And then you need to execute, and you need to establish a track record of executing on those particular goals. I've always said it's never easier than what's in a PowerPoint slide. It's when you actually have to do all that stuff that it starts to get hard. And that goes back to just having great people and having people aligned on what the goals are and being really clear sight, just eyes wide open when you're building your plans. It needs to be realistic, obviously aggressive and clever and creative in how you hit your goals, but on the other hand, clear-sighted, and not fool yourself, because then when you miss, you're not going to be raising much capital, and you're certainly not going to be creating value for anybody when you start doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important to understand at this point in time, because I think a lot of companies are sort of just trying to work their way through things, and people that I feel like have a history with raising capital, you kind of understand the challenges, but you also understand, hey, look, this is how I play in here and make this an attractive investment for people. And for people that are brand new, I guess, at raising capital, would you have any initial advice for those individuals that you would, like to sort of share with folks?
Yeah, I go back to basic principle. Make sure you're surrounding yourself with good people, but a balanced team. A lot of times, if you're doing it for the first time, you may not have the experience of certain factors because you're doing something so surround yourself with people who've done it before. Don't surround yourself with people who bring what you bring to the table, which is probably you're really smart, you're really energetic. Perhaps you're a great scientist or a commercial person or wherever your background is, but you need to build that well-rounded team. And then you really need to very much focus on how do you create value for investors? What is going to make your business worth more when you bring capital in, and then work really hard on how to concisely tell that story. And then lastly, listen more than talk. As you raise capital, you'll learn a lot. There's a lot of really smart, experienced investors out there. They typically are going to ask you the right questions. Sometimes they'll be repetitive, and gets easier when you hear the same question multiple times. But there's just a lot to be learned as you meet with different groups of people and hear about their experiences and the things that they're worried about.
Yeah. With your experience with IPOs and acquisitions, do you see similar opportunities for Sunbird Bio in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I could look at what we're doing at Sunbird, and but I could have said this at other companies too. And with the resources of bigger companies that are out there, you could move so much faster. And now, would they be able to move as quickly as we are because we don't have kind of, I won't use the word bureaucracies, but then again, I just did. But the decision-making process in a small company can be crisper, but on the other hand, the amount of data available in a bigger company is much richer. So that opportunity is no doubt there, and we're in such a big market opportunity that very much could happen. Having said that, we're building our company for the long haul. There is no question that what we're building is a company. You usually have to ask yourself a question when you're starting something. Are you building ultimately what is a feature of someone else's product? Are you building a product, or are you building a company? There's sort of three categories, and sometimes you got to really kind of come to grips with that, because sometimes it really is the feature of a product, which can be very valuable, but then you better be a part of something else at some point. We're building a company. I mean, this is a platform that can go deep within neurological disease, but there's nothing specific about this approach that wouldn't allow us to take it into cancer and other areas that have nothing to do with the brain. The same phenomena of using extracellular vesicles for detection can be applied in many, many areas. We're focused on neurological disease, and will be for some time now.
Perfect. And so as you look at the platform that Sunbird Bio has, how is it differentiated than other things that are also being developed?
Yeah, the big differentiation is the direct detection of proteins that aggregate in the brain and being able to apply this to many, many different neurological disease types. And there is no one else that we're aware of that can do that. Every development effort will have its own separate development effort for a biomarker, and we have an approach that can very easily extend itself. But that direct detection of disease proteins is the differentiator. We happen to use extracellular vesicles, but it's not the detection of the vesicles that's the magic. The magic is detecting what the vesicles are carrying through the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, very good. What's the greatest piece of leadership advice you've ever received?
Yeah, that's a great question. I worked for a CEO once who said to me, "Wow, you're a really, really good manager, and someday you're going to really be great." And I said, "Okay." His name was Doug, and I said, "Okay, Doug, I need the rest of that story. I'm happy that I'm good, but what does it take to be great?" And he said, "Well, you just have to remember, as soon as you realize everyone's not like you're going to really be able to lead and manage even better than you do now." And there's just a lot of wisdom in that. There's a tendency to think that everybody thinks the way you think, that your logic is the logic of everybody else. That people, if you're an independent worker, that others should want to work independent, and that's just not different. I think as a leader and a manager, you need to be a chameleon, and you need to manage each situation and each person to their to the best of their abilities, and really put people in positions where they can succeed. So that'd be number one. And then the second one would be, from a leadership standpoint, I had one person say to me that the real role of a chief executive officer should be called chief alignment officer. And that really is the most important role of the CEO. You need to make sure your investors, your board, your management, your employees, even when you get out to customers, everyone's aligned on what it is you're trying to accomplish and aligned on how you're going to accomplish it. Are you a company that is rough and tumble, and you kind of go into meetings and people are yelling? That's okay if everyone's aligned behind that, and they don't take it personal. It's not my style, but it can certainly work and has worked. You need to have like-minded people, and you need to be aligned behind the same goals, and you just can't communicate those goals enough. You need to remember you're thinking about it every day, but you might only be meeting with your board every 6 or 8 weeks, and they might not remember everything from one to the other. They got a lot of other board meetings going on in between. And the same is true if you have company meetings once a month. People might forget those. You need to be just constantly re-emphasizing and supporting the mission of the company and the goals, and living the values. I've never been a big believer in posting your values in conference rooms, because in my experience in bigger companies, when the values are posted, people are laughing at them because they're not really your values. It's what you want your values to be. And I'd rather be able to talk to somebody in the hallway and say, "What are our values?" without telling them what they are, and for them to tell me what they are based on what they're experiencing.
Oh, also true. I mean, yeah, there are a couple of things that you said there that really resonate with me as well. That some of the greatest CEOs that I've known, I feel like are great at extracting the greatness out of people around them, and just constantly sort of wringing more and more out of the people that they have, which is amazing to watch. Somebody just completely, that they know the fundamental answer of, for what it is that they're asking about, but at the same time, they're counting on the person that has the most recent expertise and that's supposed to provide that knowledge,
Right.
back to the individuals as well. And so the greatest people at doing that are just amazing. And yeah, so I completely agree with you. It's something to do that, but also to have people see the values of a company being actually lived out, as an example, so that they're not having to memorize something as well, for a company. Yeah, also true.
Yep.
What inspires you?
A couple of things. I mean, you just said it better than I can. People inspire me. And usually those people, as you define them, they tend to be extraordinarily positive people, and they typically dream big dreams, and then they go make it happen. And in the face of adversity, they're even more positive, and they're even more supportive. And I find that just extraordinarily inspiring. And to be pursuing big dreams that seem impossible. I think in order, if you're starting a company and you're at that early stage and you're going after, in the case of Sunbird, we're really trying to change the world of people with neurological disease, of which there are at least 50 million people around the world. That's an extraordinary dream for a little company to be trying to. I mean, we have no right to think that we can do something like that, except we can. And we are, because we're just focused and positive. And like I am truly blessed to be working with the greatest scientific team, business people that I've ever been associated with. And we're dreaming big dreams, and that's how you make them happen. It doesn't happen if you don't try.
Absolutely. What concerns you?
Everything. I've always I've always said, people have said, what does it take to kind of be a startup CEO? And my answer is, you have to be just extraordinarily optimistic. For all the reasons I just mentioned, you're dreaming big dreams, you have to be an optimist. And then you have to be paranoid too. And it sounds like those two attributes are contrary, but they're really not. If you're paranoid and you're worried about everything that's going to go wrong, it probably won't go wrong, because you're going to predict it, and you're going to get a plan and prevent what the problem may be. So I worry about every little detail, and really try to think about what can go wrong. I even, a couple of times of the year, kind of go off on my own. It's a program where I sit down and I say, okay, well, if I was joining this company in my role from the outside, what would I do? And it's my way of trying to break out of the, don't just keep doing it because it was your idea and you think you're stuck on a path. If something's not right, I want to be the one to fix it, and not my successor. And it's part of the be paranoid and worry about the details, not just the big stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question, what excites you?
Oh, the possibilities. It's we're it's like in all of medicine. I mean, we're still at the very beginning. I mean, this is going to be going on for a long time, hundreds of years. Future podcasts, whatever they're going to call them, are going to be talking some of the same things that we're talking about today. And it's just so exciting right now as the speed of medicine advances, for us to be focused on neurological disease, which is no doubt the next great frontier that we're starting to see conquered in the very earliest stages. It's just exciting and an honor to be a part of it. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there's a lot that's coming together at the same time that's only going to benefit this area as well, right? I mean, you mentioned AI earlier, and yeah, just think about all of the challenges that we've had, and the fact that you can sort of lay them out and say, hey, look, there's a possibility that these comorbidities actually could influence this one thing. Why not apply, some form of computing power to figuring out, how all of those pieces fit together. So yeah.
No question. And then the data that's being captured, whether it's proteomics, and there's so much data being captured around the world, and being able to apply it. I mean, today we're talking comorbidities of these diseases, but there's other factors going on that's causing all of this. And I think we're going to see the next wave, a lot going on. A lot of times it's under the category of aging, and trying to prevent aging. Well, really what we're doing in neurology is a big part of the aging process, and the first wave of breakthroughs associated with all of that work. And it's being driven by data.
Absolutely. Well, John McDonough, Thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and for sharing the story about Sunbird Bio. Thanks a lot for, all the work that you're doing. I know it's not easy. And, I just wanted to also, just acknowledge the hard work that you and your team must be putting in.
Well, thank you, Don. Real pleasure to talk to you today, and I enjoyed the discussion a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.